If you grew up in a house with no air conditioning, you knew the rule by heart. Once the afternoon heat settled in, the oven stayed off, no matter what was for supper. The meal came together cold, or on top of the stove, while a box fan in the window did the cooling and a tall glass of sweet tea did the rest. These were the suppers that carried families through the worst of the July heat on almost no money and almost no work, and most of them have quietly slipped off the table. Number 19 on this list baked its own crust without anyone ever touching a rolling pin. And number 7 on this list was nothing more than a ripe garden tomato and 2 slices of soft white bread. So hit subscribe, because here are 30 easy summer comfort meals from the 1970s that have vanished. Number 30. Pimento cheese sandwiches. You grated a block of sharp cheddar by hand, mixed it with a jar of diced pimentos, a few spoonfuls of mayonnaise, and a shake of cayenne pepper. You spread it thick on soft white bread and ate it cold. No stove, no waiting. In the South, pimento cheese was the summer sandwich that solved everything, and the recipe never left the family that made it. Some added a touch of Worcestershire. Some used cream cheese to smooth it out. A block of cheddar and a small jar of pimentos cost almost nothing, and the whole batch came together in 5 minutes with a box grater and a fork. When store-bought pimento cheese showed up in plastic tubs in the 1980s, the homemade version quietly disappeared from kitchen counters, and the tubs never came close to tasting the same. Number 29. Tomato aspic. This one sounds wrong to modern ears, but in the 1970s, a molded tomato gelatin was a perfectly normal thing to set on a supper table in July. You dissolved a packet of Knox gelatin in hot tomato juice, added a splash of Worcestershire and a squeeze of lemon, and poured it into a ring mold to chill. It came out looking like something from a magazine cover. You filled the center with cottage cheese or chicken salad and called it a meal. The whole thing kept the stove off and the kitchen cool, and by the 1980s, nobody under 30 would touch it. Today, it is gone entirely. Before I go on with the rest of this list, for those of you who want more recipes like these, all gathered together in one place, I have put together the Vintage Recipe Guide over at my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not mention it again in this video. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Number 28. Barbecued bologna steaks. You asked the deli counter for a thick slice of bologna, about ½ inch, scored it with a knife so it would not curl, brushed it with bottled barbecue sauce, and threw it on a hot grill or into a skillet. It sizzled and browned and smelled like a cookout, even though it cost almost nothing. You served it on a hamburger bun with mustard and pickles. In small towns from the Ozarks to the Ohio Valley, this was a summer standby. Kids loved it. Dads loved it. Nobody pretended it was health food. It was a 10-minute supper with the screen door open and the radio playing in the next room. Number 27. Porcupine meatballs. The name came from the way uncooked rice poked out of the meatballs after they simmered in tomato sauce. You mixed ground beef with raw rice, an egg, chopped onion, and whatever seasoning was in the cabinet. You rolled them into balls the size of a walnut and dropped them into a pot of Campbell's tomato soup thinned with a can of water. They cooked on low for about 45 minutes while the rice swelled inside the meat and pushed through the surface like tiny quills. Even on a warm evening, the smell pulled everyone into the kitchen. Kids ate them without complaint because they looked funny and tasted good. By the time microwave meals showed up in the 1980s, porcupine meatballs had already vanished from most kitchens. Number 26. Ham salad sandwiches. You took the leftover ham from Sunday dinner, ran it through a hand crank meat grinder bolted to the kitchen counter, and mixed the results with mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, and a touch of yellow mustard. You spread it thick on soft white bread and wrapped it in wax paper for a packed lunch, or set it on the supper table with a bag of potato chips on a hot night when nobody wanted to cook. The meat grinder was doing all the work, turning a piece of ham that would have dried out in the refrigerator into something brand new. The grinder vanished first, replaced by a food processor nobody used for ham salad. Then the sandwiches followed it out the door. Summer supper in the 1970s was not an event. Nobody mapped out the week on Sunday afternoon. You opened the refrigerator, looked at what was there, and figured it out. The meal followed the weather and the budget, not a recipe from a magazine or a delivery app. If the thermometer hit 92, you did not turn on the oven. If there was a cucumber and some leftover meatloaf and half a jar of pickles, that was dinner. The beautiful thing was that nobody apologized for it. Setting a plate of cold cuts and sliced tomatoes on the table was not considered lazy. It was considered smart. Somewhere between then and now, we decided that every weeknight supper had to look like a cooking show. We lost something real in that trade. Number 25. 7-layer salad supper. You layered iceberg lettuce, frozen peas, chopped celery, sliced hard-boiled eggs, crumbled bacon, shredded cheddar, and a thick blanket of mayonnaise in a clear glass bowl. You covered it with plastic wrap and let it sit in the refrigerator overnight. By morning, the mayonnaise had soaked down through every layer and turned the whole thing into something you could nearly cut with a spoon. Plenty of families served this as the entire meal on a hot Wednesday night, with nothing but a few slices of bread on the side. The glass bowl was half the appeal because you could see every single layer from the outside. It made the whole table look like a party. Number 24. Tamale pie. You browned ground beef with diced onion and a packet of chili seasoning, stirred in a can of whole kernel corn and a can of tomato sauce, and poured it all into a baking dish. Then you spread cornbread batter over the top and baked it until the crust turned golden and the filling bubbled up around the edges. The cornbread soaked up the spiced meat and turned into something between a casserole and a meal you could cut into squares and eat with your hands. Church cookbooks from Oklahoma to Arizona printed this recipe for 2 decades straight. It fed 5 people for under $2. Tamale pie had nothing in common with a real tamale, and nobody who ate it in 1976 worried about that for a second. Number 23. Cold plate supper. On the worst nights of July, a lot of mothers gave up on the stove entirely. They laid out a plate with a scoop of cottage cheese, some canned peach halves, a few slices of cold roast beef, a couple of deviled eggs, and maybe a handful of carrot sticks. No cooking, no pots to wash. It looked like a photograph from a 1974 Good Housekeeping spread. You sat down and ate everything cold, and nobody complained because the kitchen was already 90 degrees without the burner running. The whole idea of a composed cold plate as a real supper has disappeared completely. Today, we would call it a charcuterie board and pay $30 for it at a restaurant. Number 22. Hamburger helper skillet. Betty Crocker put the box on shelves in 1971, and by the middle of the decade, it lived in more American pantries than canned soup. You browned a pound of ground beef, dumped in the dried noodles and the seasoning packet, added water, and let the whole thing simmer for 15 minutes. The cheeseburger macaroni flavor outsold everything else in the line. Mothers who cooked from scratch 6 nights a week reached for that red box on the 7th without guilt because the kitchen was hot and the day had been long and the family needed feeding right now. A full skillet cost about $1.50 and fed 4 people. The box still sits on grocery shelves today. The families that depended on it have moved on, and nobody reaching for a modern meal kit realizes they are buying the same idea in fancier packaging. Number 21. Summer sausage and cracker plate. You sliced a log of Hickory Farm summer sausage into thin rounds, laid them out next to a sleeve of Ritz crackers and a few slices of Colby cheese, and called it supper. Maybe some pickles from a jar. Maybe not. Hickory Farm sold gift boxes around Christmas, but the sausage itself sat in grocery stores year-round, and families leaned on it hard during hot weather when nobody wanted to stand near a stove. Cold, salty, satisfying, and ready in 3 minutes flat. The idea of calling sliced meat and crackers a real supper sounds almost radical now, but in 1975 it was just a normal Thursday. Number 20. Deviled ham on white bread. The little red can with the devil on the label was an Underwood product that lived in nearly every pantry in the decade. You peeled back the lid, spread the paste on soft white bread, and ate it cold. That was lunch. That was sometimes supper on a July evening when the kitchen was too hot to even think about cooking. Salty, meaty, slightly spicy, and it lasted forever on the shelf. Mothers packed these for road trips and pool days and afternoons when the kids came in from the yard, too hungry to wait for anything else. Underwood still makes deviled ham today. The cans sit on grocery shelves untouched, and nobody is coming back for them. Before central air conditioning became standard in American homes, cooking supper in July was a physical test. The kitchen was the hottest room in the house because it had the stove and no cross breeze. A woman standing over boiling water at 5 in the afternoon in a 1973 ranch house in Memphis was working in temperatures that would shut down a modern office building. So the meals got simpler. They got faster. They moved toward the counter and away from the oven. Cold suppers, skillet meals, sandwiches built from the canned goods shelf. This was not laziness. This was survival engineering. Every meal on this list solved the same basic problem. How do you feed a family when the kitchen itself is trying to cook you first? Number 19. Impossible cheeseburger pie. Bisquick printed this recipe on the back of the box sometime in the late 1970s, and it became one of the most clipped recipes in the country almost overnight. You browned a pound of ground beef with chopped onion, spread it across the bottom of a greased pie plate, laid sliced tomatoes and shredded cheddar on top, and poured a thin batter of Bisquick eggs and milk over everything. The batter sank to the bottom during baking and formed its own crust. That was the trick that made people clip it out and tape it to the inside of a cabinet door. No rolling pin, no pie dough, no pastry skill of any kind. You poured liquid into a dish and the oven did the rest. The pie baked for about 25 minutes and came out golden brown on top with a soft, custardy crust underneath that held together just well enough to slice into wedges. You could add whatever was sitting in the vegetable drawer: green peppers, canned mushrooms, a handful of frozen broccoli left over from Sunday. But the original called for nothing beyond beef, cheese, tomato, and the Bisquick batter, and most families never saw a reason to change it. On a summer evening when the idea of standing in a hot kitchen felt like punishment, this pie gave you 10 minutes of prep and then 25 minutes of doing absolutely nothing while the oven worked. It came out looking like you had spent an hour. Kids ate it without a word of protest, and the leftovers were just as good cold the next day, straight from the refrigerator. Bisquick eventually rotated the recipe off the box, and the families who never saw it there never learned it existed. Number 18. Creamed tuna on toast. You made a white sauce in a saucepan from butter, flour, and milk, stirred in a drained can of tuna and a handful of frozen peas, and spooned the whole thing over toast. Some families called it tuna on toast. Some just called it Tuesday. The frozen peas gave it color and something green so nobody had to pretend the meal was balanced. You could have this on the table in 12 minutes on a summer evening using nothing but pantry staples. The dish disappeared so completely that most people under 50 have never heard of it. And that is a real loss, because it was honest food that filled you up and never once tried to be something it was not. Number 17. Ground beef stroganoff. The original used tenderloin and sour cream and cost a fortune, but the 1970s home version used a pound of hamburger, a packet of Lipton onion soup mix, a can of cream of mushroom soup, and a container of sour cream stirred in at the end. Served over egg noodles, it made people think you had done something special. Betty Crocker published this version in 1969, and it landed in church cookbooks and PTA recipe collections for the next 15 years. It was fast enough to be worth the stovetop heat on a summer night, and it stretched 1 pound of beef across 4 plates. When the 1990s arrived with their obsession with fresh ingredients, this became something people were embarrassed to admit they still made. Number 16. Vienna sausage plate. You peeled back the lid of a small flat can, tipped the stubby little sausages onto a plate, and ate them cold with saltine crackers and a squirt of yellow mustard. That was supper on a July evening when nobody had the will to cook, and the next grocery run was still 2 days away. Armour and Libby's sold millions of those cans through the 1970s, and they sat in the back of every pantry like an emergency ration for the night when all planning fell apart. Kids ate them with their fingers on the back porch. Fathers ate them standing at the counter. The sausages were salty and soft, and nobody pretended they were good. They were available, and on the right kind of summer night, available was the only qualification that mattered. The can is still on the shelf today, but the supper built around it has vanished entirely. Number 15. Summer squash casserole. By July, the backyard garden was producing more yellow crookneck squash than any family could eat raw, and this casserole solved that problem. You sliced the squash thin, sautéed it with onions and butter, mixed it with beaten eggs and shredded cheese, and topped it with crushed Ritz crackers. It baked for 30 minutes and came out golden and bubbling. In the Deep South, this was the side dish that became the main course when you paired it with cornbread and a glass of iced tea. It showed up at every church supper and family reunion from May through September. Today, most people who still grow yellow squash just watch the extras pile up on the counter until they go soft, and nobody wants them. Number 14. Braunschweiger on rye bread. The name sounded German and impressive, but the product was a soft tube of smoked liverwurst that cost about 70 cents and sat in the deli case of every Kroger, A&P, and Piggly Wiggly in the country. You sliced it into thick rounds, laid them on dark rye bread with a smear of yellow mustard and a thin ring of raw onion, and ate it cold. No skillet, no oven. No time spent in a kitchen that was already 10 degrees hotter than the rest of the house. In the 1970s, Braunschweiger was as ordinary as bologna across the upper Midwest. German and Scandinavian families in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa ate it the same way their parents and grandparents had, without ceremony and without apology. Oscar Mayer and Kahns both made versions that moved off shelves at a steady clip. The flavor was rich and smoky and unmistakably liver, and it divided every family and every table straight down the middle. You either grew up eating it and craved it in July, or you encountered it for the first time as an adult and could not get past the pale brown color and the spreadable texture. What ended Braunschweiger was not the taste, but the label. When nutrition labels became standard reading in the 1980s and organ meats fell out of favor, liver products went from ordinary grocery items to something people quietly stopped buying. Mothers who had served it every summer evening let the habit go. Their children never picked it up. The tubes shrank on the shelf and drifted to the bottom row where shoppers never looked. A man in Cedar Rapids or Dubuque could once walk through his front door on a Tuesday in August and have supper in his hands in 30 seconds flat. That kind of speed and simplicity at the table has not been replaced by anything. The summer meals on this list did not vanish because they were bad. They vanished because something faster showed up. The frozen food industry doubled in size between 1970 and 1985. By the time Stouffer's and Lean Cuisine and Banquet had filled every freezer case in the country, the math changed. Why spend 20 minutes browning beef and cooking noodles when you could poke holes in a plastic tray and eat in 6 minutes flat? The answer is that the homemade version was always better, but good enough won. Good enough always wins when the kitchen is hot and the day was long and nobody feels like standing at a stove. These meals lost to convenience, not to taste. Number 13. Macaroni and tomato supper. You boiled elbow macaroni, drained it, and stirred in a can of stewed tomatoes with a pat of butter and a little sugar. That was the whole thing. Some families crushed the tomatoes with a fork right in the pot. The sugar cut the acid and made it sweet enough that kids ate it without argument. In small towns from Tennessee to the Ozarks, macaroni and tomatoes was a twice-a-week supper that nobody considered unusual, especially in the summer when the garden tomatoes were coming in faster than you could use them. It was filling, it was warm, and it used two pantry staples that never ran out. The dish has no comeback story and no food blogger championing it. It is simply gone. Number 12. Macaroni salad supper. You boiled a box of elbow macaroni, drained it, and tossed it with mayonnaise, diced celery, chopped hard-boiled eggs, sweet pickle relish, and a heavy shake of paprika on top. You covered the bowl and set it in the refrigerator until supper, and when the time came, you scooped it onto plates next to sliced tomatoes or cold cuts and called it done. In the 1970s, this was not a side dish at a cookout. It was the whole meal on a Thursday night when the kitchen was 90 degrees and nobody wanted to fight about it. The bowl lasted 3 days and tasted better each time. Every family had a slightly different version and every family believed theirs was correct. When Italian pasta salad arrived in the 1980s with vinaigrette and sun-dried tomatoes, The mayonnaise version stepped aside without a word. Number 11. Spam and egg fry-up. You sliced Spam into thin rectangles and fried them in a hot skillet until the edges turned crispy and dark gold. Then you cracked 2 eggs into the same pan, scrambled them in the rendered fat, and served everything on a plate with toast. 7 minutes start to finish on a night when the heat had taken all ambition out of the house. Hormel sold more Spam in the 1970s than in any other decade, and a fair share of it ended up on supper tables rather than in lunchboxes. The combination of crispy fried meat and soft eggs cooked in pork fat was better than anyone wanted to admit. By the 1990s, Spam became a punchline, and the people who had eaten it every week stopped talking about it entirely. Number 10. Egg salad plate. You hard-boiled half a dozen eggs, mashed them with mayonnaise, yellow mustard, and a little celery salt, and served a big scoop on a lettuce leaf with sliced tomatoes and crackers on the side. No cooking beyond boiling the eggs. No time spent in a sweltering kitchen. Churches and diners and cafeterias all served egg salad plates as a complete meal, and nobody questioned whether it counted as real food. It was protein, it was cold, and you could make enough for a family in about 10 minutes. The idea of serving egg salad as a full summer supper died so quietly that I do not think anyone even noticed the moment it was gone. Number 9. Hot dog and bean skillet. You sliced 4 or 5 hot dogs, dumped them into a skillet with a large can of pork and beans, added a squirt of yellow mustard and a spoonful of brown sugar, and heated the whole thing until it bubbled. You ate it straight from the pan with a piece of white bread to soak up the sauce. This was the default summer supper for families with kids who refused to eat anything that looked complicated. No special ingredients, no advanced planning, no plates required if you were eating out on the porch while the lightning bugs came up. The meal existed to feed people quickly and cheaply, and it did that job as well as anything else on this entire list. Number 8. Pickle loaf sandwich. Oscar Mayer and Eckrich both sold this cold cut, a round disc of processed meat studded with chunks of sweet pickle and pimento that looked like confetti when you held a slice up to the light. You laid 2 pieces on white bread with yellow mustard and ate it cold. Children either loved it because it looked funny or refused to touch it because of the texture, and there was never a middle position. In small-town delis across the Midwest, pickle loaf sat in the glass case next to the olive loaf and the head cheese, and the woman behind the counter sliced it by hand on a cranked machine. The deli counter itself started vanishing in the 1990s when prepackaged lunch meat filled the cold case, and pickle loaf disappeared with it. You can still find it in a handful of butcher shops that remember what it is, but the sandwich it built is gone from nearly every kitchen in the country. Number 7. Tomato sandwiches. 2 slices of soft white bread. Mayonnaise on both sides. Thick slices of a ripe garden tomato laid across one half, a shake of salt, close it up, and eat it over the kitchen sink because the juice is going to run down your arm no matter what you do. In the 1970s, a garden tomato was a different thing from what sits in a grocery store today. It was ugly and cracked and warm from the afternoon sun and so full of juice that it barely held together on the bread. This sandwich only existed for about 8 weeks a year, when the tomatoes were ripe and the season was right. You could not plan for it and you could not buy it at a store. You walked out to the garden and picked one and ate. When backyard gardens started disappearing, the sandwich went with them. Number 6. Cucumber sandwiches. You sliced a cold cucumber from the garden as thin as you could manage, laid the rounds on soft white bread spread with mayonnaise, hit it with salt and a crack of black pepper, and closed it up. That was supper on a night so hot that even opening the refrigerator door felt like effort. The cucumber had to be cold and firm and freshly picked, or the whole thing went soggy and sad before you finished eating it. In the 1970s, backyard gardens were everywhere, and a single cucumber vine could produce more than any family knew what to do with. So you ate cucumber sandwiches 3 nights a week in July and never got tired of them. The meal grew 6 feet from the kitchen door and cost nothing beyond the bread and the mayonnaise. When backyard gardens started shrinking and the cucumbers moved to plastic wrap in the produce section, the sandwich lost the only ingredient that ever made it worth making. Number 5. Chili mac. You browned ground beef, stirred in a can of tomato sauce and a packet of chili seasoning, added cooked elbow macaroni, and topped it with shredded cheddar that melted into the meat and the noodles until the whole skillet turned into a sticky, spicy one-pan supper. Kids ate it without protest. You could make it in 15 minutes and clean up in 5. A box of macaroni, a pound of beef, and a can of sauce put a full meal on the table for under $2. Chili Mac lived in that narrow space between real cooking and just giving up. The recipe never appeared in a serious cookbook. It passed from mother to daughter by word of mouth, and when that generation stopped cooking from scratch, the recipe stopped traveling. Number 4. Chef's Salad Supper. In the 1970s, a chef's salad was a real meal, not a starter. You filled a big bowl with iceberg lettuce and piled on strips of ham, turkey, and Swiss cheese, sliced hard-boiled eggs, cherry tomatoes, and crumbled bacon. You poured Thousand Island dressing over the whole production and ate it with a dinner roll. At home, you used up every scrap of leftover deli meat and cheese from the refrigerator, and it felt intentional rather than desperate. The chef's salad was a summer supper that nobody had to cook, and the cleanup was one bowl and one fork. It vanished when the restaurant salad bar arrived. Once you could build your own at Sizzler for pocket change, nobody bothered doing it at home anymore. That is how most of these meals died. Number 3. Corn fritter supper. You stirred a can of creamed corn together with flour, an egg, and a pinch of sugar, and dropped spoonfuls of the batter into hot oil. They puffed up golden and crispy on the outside and stayed soft and sweet in the middle. Served with butter and maple syrup or alongside a thick slice of country ham, corn fritters were a full meal in parts of the South and the Midwest during every summer of the 1970s. They were best within 5 minutes of coming out of the oil, when the outside was still crackling and steam rose off the center when you broke one open. Deep frying at home fell out of fashion by the late 1980s, and the corn fritter supper went with it. Number 2. 3-bean salad supper. You drained a can of green beans, a can of wax beans, and a can of kidney beans, tossed them with sliced raw onion rings, a little sugar, vinegar, and vegetable oil, and let the bowl sit in the refrigerator for at least 4 hours. By supper time, the beans had soaked through with the sweet vinegar dressing and turned into something tangy and cold enough to eat on the worst night of July. Grandmothers kept a bowl of it in the refrigerator from June through September. It showed up at every potluck, every cookout, and every kitchen table where someone had decided that cooking was not going to happen tonight. The salad required no heat, no skill, and no explanation. It was honest summer food made from 3 cans and a bottle of vinegar. When the potluck slowed down and the canned bean aisle lost its hold on the American pantry, 3-bean salad disappeared with them. Number 1. The Icebox Supper. This was the meal with no recipe because it was never really a recipe at all. On the hottest nights of summer, when the ceiling fan just pushed the heat around the room, you opened the refrigerator and pulled out whatever was there. Leftover meatloaf, cold potato salad from Sunday, a dish of pickled beets your neighbor brought over, a heel of bread and some butter. You set it all on the table and everybody served themselves and nobody said a word about whether it counted. It counted. It counted because somebody set the table and filled the glasses with iced tea and sat down with the people they loved, even when there was nothing special to sit down for. That was the whole point of every meal on this list. They were made by people who believed that feeding your family was reason enough to walk into a hot kitchen and do something. That belief has not vanished, but the meals that carried it have. The next time the thermometer pushes past 90 and you open the refrigerator with nothing planned, remember that your mother or your grandmother stood in the same spot 50 years ago and figured it out with less: a can of tuna, a tomato from the yard, a skillet, and 10 minutes. That was enough then, and it is enough now. Number 17. Cheese quesadilla. 1 flour tortilla, a handful of shredded cheese, a dry skillet. Fold the tortilla in half, drop it in the pan, flip it once. 2 minutes. The cheese melted and held the tortilla together and the edges crisped in the dry heat. Total cost, about 40 cents. Mexican-American families in South Texas made this for children as an afternoon snack. Seniors adopted it as a full meal because it was fast, required one hand, and could be eaten without a fork. A retired school bus driver in San Antonio named Ruben Garza told his daughter he ate quesadillas 4 nights a week. She asked what he ate the other 3 nights. He said crackers. The flour tortilla was introduced to American grocery stores on a national scale in the early 1980s. Before that, you had to live near a Mexican bakery or make your own. By 2024, flour tortillas outsold hamburger buns in the United States. The shift was not cultural appreciation, it was economics. A package of 10 tortillas cost $2.49. A package of 8 hamburger buns cost $3.29. Hominy is corn soaked in an alkaline solution, wood ash, lye, or slaked lime, until the outer hull loosens and the kernel becomes something entirely different, a process called nixtamalization that the Cherokee and other Native American nations had practiced for centuries before European settlers arrived in the Appalachian Mountains and learned it from them. The alkaline treatment unlocked niacin that dried corn could not release on its own, and the settlers who adopted it kept their families healthier without knowing exactly why. By the 1950s, most Appalachian families got their hominy from a can. Van Camp's was the brand most kitchens stocked, warming it in a skillet with butter and cracked black pepper. Old-timers remembered when it was supper itself, heaped into a bowl, eaten hot enough to steam. The flavor was different from grits, blunter and chewier, and anyone who grew up eating it never confused the two. It was its own thing, and the people who understood that distinction are mostly gone. Toast with bacon drippings carried the rich memory of breakfast into evening meals, using saved fat that thrifty households never discarded. During the 1940s through 70s, seniors understood that bacon grease collected in jars beside the stove was liquid gold for flavoring and spreading. A slice of bread was toasted until golden, then spread while warm with a thin layer of cooled drippings seasoned with salt from countless previous cookings. The fat melted slightly into warm bread, creating savory richness that satisfied hunger and stretched resources. Some seniors sprinkled their dripping toast with black pepper or topped it with tomato slices when gardens were producing. The flavor was deeply porky, slightly smoky, and wholly comforting to those who remembered when nothing edible was ever thrown away. This single slice often served as complete supper when appetites were small. Toast with bacon drippings represented waste-nothing kitchens where every ingredient served multiple purposes. Number 24, peanut butter and banana sandwich. George Washington Carver spent decades proving that the peanut could feed a nation. He was right. A jar of peanut butter cost $2.50 in 2024 and lasted a single person 2 weeks. A bunch of bananas cost 65 cents. 2 slices of bread, a smear of peanut butter, half a banana sliced on top. That was a meal with 15 grams of protein, potassium, and enough calories to carry a person through an entire evening. Senior centers across the rural South served this as an afternoon meal because it required no refrigeration, no preparation space, and no cleanup beyond a butter knife and a plate. Harold Meeks, a retired carpenter in Paducah, Kentucky, ate one every night at 5:30 for the last 4 years of his life. His daughter found the routine maddening. His doctor found his potassium levels perfect. The USDA reported in 2023 that peanut butter was the single most consumed protein source among Americans over the age of 75 who lived alone. Not chicken, not eggs. Peanut butter. The reason was not taste. Red-eye gravy required exactly 2 things: country ham and black coffee, the stronger the better. You fried the ham, pulled it out, poured a cup of dark coffee over the hot drippings, and scraped the browned bits loose as it hissed. 3 minutes. Done. Some people in Appalachia called it red sop, and the name came from the reddish ring the coffee and fat left at the skillet's edge, darker on the outside, lighter in the center, like an eye. Country ham had been a staple in Virginia and the Mountain South since colonial times, and the tradition of deglazing ham drippings with coffee likely came from Scots-Irish settlers who wasted nothing and never saw a reason to change. You poured it over grits or biscuits, and the bitterness of the coffee cut the salt and fat in a way that shouldn't have worked, but absolutely did. But the quick suppers didn't end with ham. Beneath all that smoky pork lay a whole world of mountain resourcefulness, where garden scraps and foraged food and vegetables nobody else wanted carried as much weight as any cut of meat. Stewed tomatoes on toast brought garden flavor to supper tables using canned tomatoes that cost pennies and required almost no preparation. Seniors who had canned their own tomatoes during summer or purchased store brands during lean times understood this humble ingredient's versatility. The tomatoes were heated in a small saucepan with butter, salt, sugar, and sometimes torn bread pieces that thickened the liquid into something approaching sauce. This warm mixture was spooned over buttered toast that soaked up the juices gratefully. The combination provided vitamins, fiber, and comfort of something warm and savory. Some seniors added black pepper or Worcestershire sauce to deepen flavors. Others kept things simple, letting tomatoes speak for themselves. The dish appeared on tables across America during decades when making do meant making delicious from almost nothing. Stewed tomatoes on toast proved that a can of tomatoes and bread slice could become something worth sitting down to eat properly. Number 10. Cornbread crumbled in buttermilk. This was the meal that confused outsiders and comforted insiders. You took a piece of leftover cornbread, crumbled it into a glass of cold buttermilk, and ate it with a spoon. That was it. No cooking, no heating, no plates. In rural Arkansas, Tennessee, and Kentucky, this was supper on a hot summer night when the kitchen was too warm to use the stove. A box of cornmeal cost $1.49. A quart of buttermilk cost $1.99. Together, they made enough cornbread and buttermilk suppers for a week. Appalachian families had been eating this since before the Civil War. It was not a recipe anyone wrote down because everyone already knew it. Like breathing, like walking. A retired coal miner in Harlan County, Kentucky named Vernon Sizemore ate cornbread and buttermilk every evening of his retirement. He said it tasted exactly the way his mother's kitchen smelled in 1952. The tradition crossed racial lines in the rural South in a way that few other foods did. Chocolate gravy is exactly the kind of dish that makes people from outside Appalachia raise an eyebrow until they taste it. In Kentucky and Tennessee mountain kitchens, it was made with cocoa powder, flour, sugar, and water. No milk, no butter, cooked until thick and glossy, then spooned hot over biscuits as a supper that was both meal and dessert, and neither one exactly. The recipe spread through families in the Cumberland Plateau, from women who knew that sugar and starch could fill a stomach as surely as any meat, and that children who refused beans for the third night running would eat without complaint if something sweet came with it. The wider food world discovered chocolate gravy in the early 2000s and called it Southern, but it was Appalachian first, specific to these mountains. Every family made it slightly differently, some using milk, some adding butter at the end, some keeping no written recipe at all. When your grandmother stopped making it, the version she made stopped existing, and the distance between her version and every other version closed to nothing. Sardines on crackers represented pantry cooking at its most practical, requiring nothing more than opening a tin and arranging contents on whatever crackers were at hand. For seniors living alone during the 1960s and 70s, this combination offered complete protein and essential oils without any cooking whatsoever. The tiny fish came packed in oil, water, or mustard sauce depending on preference, and a single tin stretched across 2 meals when appetite was small. Saltine crackers were the traditional base, their neutral flavor providing contrast to the rich, briny fish. Some seniors added lemon juice or hot sauce to brighten flavors. Others mashed the sardines with a fork, creating a spread that distributed more evenly. The entire meal cost pennies and provided nutrients doctors recommended for aging bodies. Sardines on crackers were consumed at kitchen tables by people who understood that dignity in dining came from adequacy, not extravagance. Number 14. Bologna and cheese sandwich. 2 slices of white bread, a slice of bologna, a slice of American cheese, a smear of mustard. That was the lunch that built working-class America and then retired with it. Oscar Mayer bologna cost $2.49 a package in 2024 and contained enough slices for 8 sandwiches. That was 31 cents per meal before the bread and cheese. Factory workers in Detroit and Cleveland and Gary ate this every day for 30 years, then kept eating it in retirement because the taste was wired into them. It was not nostalgia, it was neurological. The flavor of cold bologna on soft bread with yellow mustard triggered something that no restaurant meal could replicate. For a senior living alone, this sandwich was less than 5 minutes from start to finish, required no heat, no cleanup beyond a plate, and tasted exactly the same every single time. That predictability was not boring. It was safe. In a world where everything else was changing and falling away, the bologna sandwich stayed exactly where you left it. The economics of meals like this one tell a story that the food industry would rather you did not hear. A package of bologna, a loaf of bread, and a block of cheese cost under $7 together and fed a person for a week. A single frozen dinner from the same grocery store cost $4 and lasted one night. The math was not complicated, but the frozen dinner had a commercial and a colorful box and a place in the freezer section at eye level. The bologna was on the bottom shelf. The beans were in the back aisle. The oats were wherever the store decided to hide them. These meals survived not because of marketing, but in spite of it. The cheapest, most nutritious foods in America are the ones with the smallest advertising budgets and the lowest profit margins. That is not an accident. It is a business model that depends on seniors not knowing what a can of beans and a slice of bread can actually do. Chow chow was the relish that stretched a pot of pinto beans into a full supper, and every family in Appalachia who kept a garden made it differently. The foundation was always the same: green tomatoes, cabbage, onions, hot and sweet peppers, salted overnight to draw the water out, then cooked in vinegar and sugar and packed into mason jars while the kitchen filled with sharp, sweet steam that meant fall and the end of the garden. Food scholar Mark Sohn, in his Appalachian Home Cooking, identified chow chow as one of the oldest continuously made condiments in the Mountain South, with roots in British Piccalilli and Cherokee preservation traditions. You spooned it over beans to replace the meat you didn't have, the vinegar cutting the starchy flatness of the pinto in a way nothing else managed. Some families made it hot, some made it sweet. The argument over whose version was better was an argument that never got settled, which is how you knew it mattered. Cottage cheese and canned fruit became staple supper for seniors who needed protein without cooking effort and welcomed sweetness without dessert guilt. This combination required nothing more than spooning cottage cheese onto a plate and arranging canned peach halves, pear slices, or fruit cocktail alongside. The curds provided protein and calcium, while fruit offered vitamins and comfort of something sweet. During the 1950s and 60s, this was considered health food, recommended by doctors for patients needing gentle nourishment. The cottage cheese came in different curd sizes according to preference, and canned fruit ranged from budget brands to premium varieties. Some seniors added cinnamon or honey when company feelings struck. The cost remained minimal, since both ingredients kept well and stretched across multiple meals. Cottage cheese and canned fruit represented the intersection of economy and nutrition that practical seniors navigated daily, providing satisfaction without demanding time or energy. Number 23. Cottage cheese and canned peaches. This was the meal that women of a certain generation called a salad. It was not a salad. It was a scoop of cottage cheese dropped onto a plate beside a mound of canned peach halves drained from a 79-cent can. That was the entire preparation. No heat, no stirring, no standing. A half cup of cottage cheese delivered 14 grams of protein and was soft enough for seniors with dental problems to eat without struggle. The peaches added sweetness and vitamin C. Hospital cafeterias served this exact combination on trays to patients recovering from surgery in the 1960s and 1970s because it required no chewing and no digestion effort. For a senior living alone, it was the meal you made when you did not feel like eating, but knew you had to. It asked nothing of you. It just sat there on the plate, waiting. Weight Watchers put cottage cheese and fruit on its approved list in 1963, and an entire generation of American women never stopped eating it. Bulldog gravy was what you made when there was no meat at all. also called white gravy or milk gravy or just gravy with no qualifier. It started with whatever fat you had, a heaping spoon of flour stirred in until the roux thickened, and then milk or water poured in slow. In Appalachia, the version made with water instead of milk was sometimes called poor gravy, even by the people who ate it, because they knew the difference and they felt it. You poured it over day-old cornbread that had gone dry, and the gravy brought it back to something that could fill a stomach. In Kentucky and West Virginia, mining communities during the Depression, and again during the coal slowdowns of the 1950s and 60s, this was what supper looked like on the worst weeks of the month. Not a figure of speech, just the actual food on the actual table. The children who ate it grew up and moved to cities and never made it again, and some never told their own kids it had existed. Creamed eggs on toast transformed breakfast ingredients into satisfying supper that cost almost nothing and came together in under 10 minutes. Seniors who survived the Depression understood that eggs were among the most affordable proteins, stretching further when combined with simple white sauce. The preparation began with melting butter in a saucepan, whisking in flour until smooth, then slowly adding milk while stirring until thickened. Hard-boiled eggs, already prepared and waiting in the refrigerator, were chopped and folded into this creamy base with salt and pepper. The mixture was spooned over buttered toast while still warm. The result was rich, filling, and deceptively elegant for something made from such humble ingredients. This dish fed widows and widowers across America during decades when eating alone meant cooking economically but eating well. The eggs provided protein while the toast gave substance, and the sauce made everything feel like someone had taken care. Number 16. Oatmeal with brown sugar. A canister of old-fashioned oats cost $3.49 in 2024 and contained 30 servings. That was 12 cents a bowl. You measured half a cup of oats, added water, microwaved it for 90 seconds, and stirred in a spoonful of brown sugar. 5 grams of protein. 4 grams of fiber. A warm bowl that felt like morning even when you ate it at 7 in the evening. The Quaker Oats Company began marketing oatmeal as a health food in the 1980s, but Depression-era families had been eating it for survival long before anyone cared about cholesterol. For a senior living alone, oatmeal served a double purpose. It was breakfast when you ate it in the morning, and it was comfort when you ate it at night. The warmth of the bowl in your hands on a cold evening in February mattered as much as the nutrition inside it. Meals on Wheels programs across the country reported that oatmeal was the #1 food item that recipients already had in their homes before the first delivery arrived. It preceded the help. Nobody called them hoe cakes because they were fashionable. They got the name because early Appalachian settlers sometimes cooked them on the flat of a hoe blade held over an open fire when no skillet was available, a technique documented in the Foxfire series of oral histories from the 1970s. By the time these kitchens were at their peak, hoe cakes were made in cast iron with no ceremony. Cornmeal, a pinch of salt, enough water for a pourable batter, dropped onto a hot greased skillet in silver dollar rounds and cooked until the edges went lacy. They were done in under 10 minutes. No oven, no yeast, no waiting. You could make them while the beans simmered and have bread on the table before the pot was ready. Some cooks added an egg. Most didn't. They used what they had, which was cornmeal and bacon grease in a hot pan. Younger generations grew up thinking cornbread always came from a box and always baked in the oven. So the knowledge of making bread on a stovetop with nothing but cornmeal and heat slipped away quietly, without anyone choosing to let it go. Welsh Rarebit in its quick version brought pub-style comfort to kitchen tables, requiring only cheese, milk, and toast to create something surprisingly sophisticated. Seniors who remembered this dish from earlier decades simplified the traditional recipe into something achievable in under 10 minutes. Sharp cheddar was grated and melted slowly in a small saucepan with a splash of milk, dash of Worcestershire sauce, and sometimes pinch of dry mustard. The mixture was stirred until smooth, then spooned generously over toast placed on a plate. The cheese sauce pooled around bread, creating a dish part soup and part sandwich, eaten with knife and fork. The flavors were bold and savory, the texture rich and comforting. For seniors eating alone, Welsh rarebit felt like treating yourself to something special without leaving home or spending much money. This dish transformed ordinary pantry ingredients into something that tasted like care and intention. Number 22, fried egg sandwich. 2 eggs, 2 slices of bread, a pat of butter. Total cost in 2024, 63 cents. You melted the butter in a skillet, cracked the eggs, waited 3 minutes, put them between the bread, and sat down. That was it. The Depression generation ate fried egg sandwiches the way modern Americans eat fast food, quickly, cheaply, without thinking. But the nutritional math was different. 2 eggs had 12 grams of protein, B12, and choline, a nutrient that most seniors were deficient in and that doctors now link to memory and brain function. Diners across America sold fried egg sandwiches for 35 cents in the 1970s. By the 1990s, they had mostly disappeared from menus. But in kitchens where money was tight and time was short, the fried egg sandwich never went anywhere. Edna Kowalski, a retired seamstress in Toledo, Ohio, made one every morning and every evening for 19 years. She called it her bookend meal. The day started and ended the same way. That rhythm mattered to her more than the food itself. Tomato gravy started in the bacon grease left from breakfast. A spoon of flour stirred in until the roux turned pale gold, then a quart of home-canned tomatoes dumped in and mashed down with a fork. The whole thing thickened in the time it took to split the biscuits. It wasn't a sauce. It was a gravy. And there's a difference any mountain cook would insist on, because a sauce is something fancy, and a gravy is what you make when supper has to come from the shelf. Families across Kentucky and West Virginia kept canned tomatoes year-round for this dish, putting up 40 or 50 quarts each August so that winter suppers had something red and hot to pour over bread. The trick was the roux. You couldn't rush it, and the women who made this knew the exact moment the flour changed from raw to ready just by the way the skillet smelled. You poured it over biscuits that were already cold, and the gravy brought them back to life. The last jar of tomatoes in February had a different weight to it, and she always said so. Milk toast was the quiet companion of countless evenings spent alone, a dish so simple it seemed too humble to call dinner. Yet for seniors watching every penny during the 1950s and 60s, this warm bowl delivered exactly what tired bodies needed. Stale bread was never wasted in those kitchens where thrift meant survival. Slices were toasted lightly, placed in a shallow bowl, and covered with warm milk heated with butter and a pinch of salt. The bread softened into something between solid and liquid, easy to eat for those with dental troubles or diminished appetites. Some added sugar or cinnamon when sweetness was needed. The cost was negligible since milk and bread were pantry constants, and preparation took barely 5 minutes. Milk toast carried memories of childhood sickbeds and mothers tending fevered children. For seniors eating alone, this bowl meant warmth without fuss and nourishment without pretense. Number 19, tuna salad on bread. 1 can of Chunk Light tuna cost $1.09 in 2024. A spoonful of mayonnaise, a pinch of salt, a squeeze of lemon if you had it, mash it with a fork, spread it on bread, 2 minutes. Church food pantries across the Midwest packed tuna, mayonnaise packets, and bread together in bags because they knew this was the meal most seniors would actually make, not the dried pasta, not the canned vegetables that required a pot and a stove and energy that some people did not have. The tuna sandwich. Dorothy Hale, a 74-year-old widow in Wichita, Kansas, told a food bank volunteer in 2019 that she ate tuna on bread 5 nights a week. The volunteer asked if she wanted something different. Dorothy said no. She said the tuna was easy and the bread was soft, and she could eat it watching the evening news without getting up. That was enough. The American canned tuna industry peaked in 1989 when the average American ate 3.5 pounds of canned tuna per year. Cushaw was a hillbilly squash that most of the country never heard of. A large, crook-necked, cream and green-striped gourd that grew heavy on the vine in Appalachian gardens from Virginia down through Georgia, one of the few crops robust enough to thrive in Rocky Mountain soil. Its roots went deeper than European settlement. The Cherokee had been cultivating cushaw for centuries before Scots-Irish settlers arrived, and those settlers learned to grow it from the people who already knew, the same way they learned corn and beans. Sliced thin and laid into a hot skillet with butter and a sprinkle of brown sugar, it cooked fast, the sugar caramelizing at the edges, the flesh going soft and sweet and slightly stringy in a way that butternut or acorn squash never managed. Appalachian food writer Ronnie Lundy, in her James Beard award-winning cookbook Victuals, described cushaw as tied to mountain memory in a way that nutritional language alone cannot hold. The Foxfire Fund in Mountain City, Georgia, still works to preserve heirloom crops like cushaw, but the women who knew the exact moment to pull it from the pan are mostly gone. Cinnamon toast delivered sweetness and warmth in under 5 minutes, becoming the default supper for seniors who craved comfort without complexity. The preparation was almost meditative. Bread was toasted until golden, then spread immediately with soft butter that melted into the warm surface. Sugar and cinnamon, pre-mixed in small jars kept near the stove, were sprinkled generously over the buttered surface. The heat caused the sugar to dissolve slightly, creating a thin, sweet crust that crackled between teeth. Some seniors placed their cinnamon toast under the broiler to caramelize the topping into something approaching candy. The aroma alone lifted spirits on difficult evenings. This was comfort food in its purest form, requiring nothing fancy and delivering everything needed. For widows and widowers eating alone during the 1950s and 60s, cinnamon toast meant dessert and dinner combined into one affordable, satisfying meal that tasted like childhood remembered. Number 25. Sardines on toast. In 1943, The Joy of Cooking printed a recipe for sardine toast that cost less than a dime. 80 years later, the meal still works the same way. You opened a tin, laid the fish across a piece of toast, and ate it over the sink or at the table. That was the whole production. A tin of sardines cost 89 cents at most grocery stores in 2024. One tin had 23 grams of protein and more calcium than a glass of milk because of the soft bones packed inside. Seniors who ate sardines regularly were getting omega-3 fatty acids that most Americans pay $30 a month for in supplement form. Fishermen's wives in Gloucester, Massachusetts ate sardine toast for lunch every day through the 1950s and 1960s. They did not call it a health food. They called it Tuesday. For a senior with shaking hands, there was no knife work, no cooking, no heat required. You pulled the tab, you spread the fish, you ate. Done. White half-runner beans were not the beans you bought at a grocery store. They were a specific Appalachian heirloom variety, a pole bean with a creamy white hull and a green runner, developed over generations by mountain gardeners in the region, stretching from southwestern Virginia through eastern Tennessee and into western North Carolina. They grew on poles. They had to be strung and broken by hand, and the children old enough to sit still were expected to help. They cooked faster than dried pintos and tasted different, earthier, starchier, with a flavor that people from outside the region found hard to describe and people from inside recognized instantly as home. You put them in a pot with fatback and water, brought them to a boil, and let them go until they were soft enough to mash with your tongue. You didn't time it. You tasted. The seeds were passed between families the way recipes should be. No paperwork, just a jar over the fence in the fall. When families stopped growing gardens, the half-runner slipped away with them. Soft-boiled eggs with toast soldiers turned a simple egg into an interactive meal that brought small pleasure to solitary dining. Seniors who grew up with this British-influenced tradition continued preparing it well into later years, finding comfort in the familiar ritual. The egg was lowered gently into boiling water and cooked for exactly 3 to 4 minutes, producing set white and gloriously runny yolk. Meanwhile, toast was prepared and cut into narrow strips called soldiers, ready for dipping. The egg sat in a small cup, its top carefully removed to reveal golden liquid within. Each toast soldier was dipped into the yolk, emerging coated in rich goodness that made plain bread taste extraordinary. The meal cost almost nothing yet felt ceremonial, requiring attention that gave structure to evenings that might otherwise blur together. For seniors eating alone, the process of dipping and eating provided small entertainment alongside nourishment. Number 12. Ramen noodles with an egg. A single packet of ramen cost 25 cents in 2024. That made it the cheapest meal in America per serving. You boiled water, dropped in the noodles, stirred in the seasoning packet, and cracked an egg into the pot in the last 30 seconds. The egg poached gently in the hot broth, the yolk still soft. 4 minutes total. A retired postal worker's wife in Cleveland, Ohio, a woman named Vivian Cross, ate ramen with an egg every night for 2 years after her husband passed. She told her daughter it was because she was not hungry enough for a real meal. But the truth was simpler. She could make it without thinking. She could eat it without effort. And the warm broth at the end, spooned slowly from the bottom of the bowl, was the only part of the evening that felt like anything at all. Maruchan and Nissin between them sold more than 4 billion packets of instant ramen in the United States every year. The peanut butter and raw onion sandwich never made it onto any menu or into any cookbook, which is exactly why the people who grew up eating it remember it the way they do, as something specific to a kitchen where nothing got wasted and protein came from wherever it could be found. A thick smear of peanut butter on white bread, a few rings of raw white onion laid across it, pressed together, and supper was done in 2 minutes. In the Depression years, when meat was scarce in Appalachian coal towns, peanut butter was among the cheapest sources of fat and protein on company store shelves. Regional brands had been stocked there since the 1920s, and raw onion added the sharp bite that made it feel like a meal. Nobody puts it on the table for guests now, but the people who ate it as children still remember the specific sting of the onion against the sweetness, and some of them still make it alone, quietly. Bread and milk bowl was perhaps the oldest and simplest supper in the American pantry, dating back centuries and persisting through every economic hardship. Seniors who remembered harder times often returned to this dish when cooking seemed too effortful and appetites had shrunk with age. The preparation required nothing more than tearing bread into pieces, placing them in a bowl, and pouring cold or warm milk over the top. Sugar was sprinkled according to taste, transforming the humble combination into something approaching dessert. Some preferred their bread and milk warm, heating the milk gently before pouring. Others liked it cold, especially during summer months. The bread softened quickly, becoming easy to eat with a spoon, gentle on sensitive stomachs and aging teeth. This was food stripped to its essence. For seniors eating alone, bread and milk represented self-sufficiency and comfort of familiar flavors, asking nothing and giving everything a tired body needed. Number 15. Tomato soup with crackers. A can of Campbell's condensed tomato soup cost $1.29 and had been sitting in American pantries since 1897. You added water or milk, heated it on the stove or in the microwave, and crumbled saltines into it until the surface disappeared under a layer of soggy crackers. That was the ritual. Andy Warhol made the can famous in 1962, but the soup was already famous in every kitchen where money was tight and time was shorter. Senior centers served tomato soup with grilled cheese as their most popular lunch combination for decades. For a person eating alone, the soup was warm and familiar, and the crackers gave you something to do with your hands. Eating slowly, breaking each cracker into pieces, watching them sink, it was almost a meditation. Campbell's sold more than 2.5 billion cans of soup per year in the United States during the 2010s. Internal marketing research leaked in 2019 showed that adults over 65 accounted for 38% of all condensed soup purchases, the largest single demographic. The company knew this. Fatback had no glamour. It was the part of the hog nobody else wanted, pure white fat salted and stored in a crock. But in Appalachian kitchens from the 1930s through the 1960s, it was the engine of every meal. You sliced it thin, laid it in a cold skillet, and let it render slow. By the time the slices went brown and rigid at the edges, the pan was full of clear golden fat worth more than the meat itself. The crackling slices got eaten, salty, crunchy, intensely porky, but the drippings went into a jar by the stove that was never empty if the family was doing all right. A half-pound of fatback cost a few cents at the company store in coal towns across West Virginia and eastern Kentucky, and it seasoned every pot of beans, every skillet of greens, every pan of cornbread for a month. You didn't measure. You poured until the color looked right, and if you had to ask what that meant, you hadn't spent enough time watching. The jar by the stove was the first thing to disappear when the next generation moved to town. Buttered noodles satisfied hunger with the simplest combination of starch, fat, and salt, asking nothing of the cook beyond boiling water. Seniors living alone during the 1960s and 70s kept boxes of egg noodles in their pantries for evenings when cooking felt like too much, but hunger insisted on attention. The noodles were boiled until tender, drained thoroughly, then returned to the warm pot where butter was added along with generous salt and pepper. The butter melted into warm pasta, coating each strand with glossy richness that tasted more indulgent than ingredients suggested. Some added dried parsley for color or grated cheese when budget allowed. The entire preparation took under 10 minutes and produced a bowl of comfort that filled empty stomachs without taxing limited energy. Buttered noodles were honest food that never pretended to be more than what they were. For seniors eating alone, this simple dish provided warmth on nights when elaborate cooking was impossible. Number 13. Scrambled eggs and toast. Clara Canucciari was 93 years old when her grandson filmed her making Depression-era recipes in her kitchen. One of the first things she made was scrambled eggs. She cracked 2 eggs into a bowl, stirred them with a fork, poured them into a buttered pan, and pushed them around for 90 seconds. 2 slices of toast on the side. That was dinner. During the Depression, her family ate scrambled eggs 3 or 4 times a week because a dozen eggs cost 18 cents in 1933, and each egg was a self-contained meal. In 2024, a dozen eggs cost around $3.50 at most grocery stores, which still made each egg less than 30 cents. For a senior with limited grip strength, cracking eggs was sometimes the hardest part. Some kept a small bowl on the counter to crack them against the edge. Some bought liquid eggs in cartons. The adaptation was quiet, practical, and invisible, like most things seniors did to keep themselves fed. The videos Clara made with her grandson gained millions of views on YouTube. Fried cabbage cost almost nothing. A full head fed a family of 5, and the only other ingredient was salt pork, which was the cheapest cut at the smokehouse or the company store. You shredded the cabbage coarse, got the skillet hot, laid the salt pork in until it colored, then added the cabbage all at once and covered the pan long enough for steam to wilt it. Then you took the lid off and let the water cook out until the edges browned at the bottom of the pan. The pinch of sugar was the secret. Not enough to taste sweet, just enough to pull the natural sugars out of the cabbage and help it caramelize, and the women who knew this never needed to say it out loud because they had learned it by watching. In Depression-era Appalachia, cabbage was one of the few vegetables that grew cheap and reliable in Rocky Mountain soil, and fried cabbage with side meat appeared on supper tables across West Virginia and Virginia coal country 3 and 4 nights a week without anyone considering it hardship. It tasted like something made with care. It was. Peanut butter on crackers provided complete protein and staying power without requiring a single pot or pan. Seniors living on fixed incomes during the 1960s and 70s kept jars of peanut butter in their pantries as insurance against hunger. Saltines, graham crackers, or Ritz crackers served as the canvas for this thick, sticky spread that required some effort to eat, but rewarded patience with satisfaction. The peanut butter could be spread thin for economy, or thick for indulgence depending on the day's mood and the jar's remaining contents. Some seniors drizzled honey over their peanut butter crackers, or added sliced banana when fruit was available. The combination of fat, protein, and carbohydrate kept blood sugar stable through long evenings. This meal required no cooking, no cleanup beyond a knife wiped clean, and no particular skill. Peanut butter on crackers represented pure practicality, transformed into genuine sustenance for people who understood that simple did not mean inadequate. Number 21. Buttered noodles with salt and pepper. A box of store-brand egg noodles cost 89 cents and contained 8 servings. You boiled a handful, drained them, added a tablespoon of butter, salt, and black pepper. 3 minutes of cooking. 0 minutes of thought. This was the meal that mothers made for sick children in the 1950s, and that widowers made for themselves in the 1990s. The simplicity was not a compromise. It was the entire point. For a senior whose appetite had faded, plain buttered noodles went down easy and stayed down. No strong flavors to reject, no textures to fight. Nursing home cooks knew this. When a resident refused everything else on the tray, they brought buttered noodles. It worked almost every time. The meal was so plain it was invisible. Nobody photographed it. Nobody wrote about it. But it kept people eating when nothing else could. A geriatric nutritionist at Johns Hopkins published a paper in 2018 noting that simple carbohydrate meals like buttered noodles played a critical role in preventing dangerous weight loss among elderly patients living independently. Squirrel was free, and in the hills of eastern Kentucky and western North Carolina, free meat meant everything when the alternative was money the family didn't have. A single gray squirrel filled a skillet. 2 or 3 made a proper supper. Brown the pieces in hot lard until the outside crisped. Pull them out. Add flour and water. Stir until the gravy thickened and turned a deep brown. And what you had was something wild and slightly nutty that no store-bought package ever matched. The squirrel hunting season in Appalachian communities was a social institution. Men and boys went out together in the early morning the way their fathers had, and what came back fed everyone for days. Mark Sohn, the food historian and author of Appalachian Home Cooking, documented squirrel gravy as one of the defining dishes of mountain Kentucky food culture, a dish that required no recipe because the women who made it had been making it their whole lives, as had the women who taught them. The knowledge lived in the hands, not in any written-down place, and when the hands stopped, so did the gravy. Number 7. Grilled cheese sandwich. 2 slices of bread, a slice of American cheese, a pat of butter in a skillet. 3 minutes per side. The cheese melted and stretched, and the bread turned golden, and the whole kitchen smelled like childhood for the cost of about 50 cents. Diners in every American town had a grilled cheese on the menu for decades. The price climbed from 25 cents in 1960 to $6.99 at a Brooklyn restaurant in 2024. But the version a senior made at home still cost almost nothing. Margaret Hensley, a retired telephone operator in Louisville, Kentucky, made a grilled cheese every Sunday evening for 22 years after she stopped going to church. She said Sunday evenings were the loneliest part of the week, and the grilled cheese was the closest thing to company. The National Dairy Council ran advertisements in the 1950s encouraging mothers to make grilled cheese for their children after school. The campaign worked. The first frost came fast in the mountains and killed whatever was still green overnight. Fried green tomatoes were what you made the week before. Every tomato that hadn't ripened, sliced thick, dredged through cornmeal with salt and pepper, and laid into a skillet of hot bacon grease until the outside went golden and crackled and the inside softened just enough to give. They weren't the romanticized version that arrived in restaurants decades later. They were a practical harvest, a way of eating what would otherwise rot on the vine. The cornmeal crust transformed the chalky bitterness of an unripe tomato into something with texture and heat, and enough fat to feel like a meal. Mountain families in North Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee had done this since the 19th century, using cornmeal ground at the nearest mill. You never added anything fancy to the dredge. The grease had to be hot enough that the slice sizzled the second it touched the pan. If it didn't, you'd waited too long. If you had to ask how hot the grease was, you weren't ready to cook them. Number 9. Canned soup with saltines. A can of chicken noodle soup, a sleeve of saltines, a bowl. This was the meal that said, "I do not have the energy to make dinner tonight." Campbell's sold more than 2 billion cans of soup in the United States every year, and a significant portion of those cans were opened by seniors eating alone. The soup was already cooked. You just heated it. The saltines gave it body and made the thin broth feel more substantial. Hospitals served this to patients. Schools served it to children. Senior centers served it to anyone who walked through the door. For a person living alone, Opening a can of soup was sometimes the most significant act of self-care in an entire day. It meant you had decided to eat. It meant you had not given up. The can opener was the most important tool in a senior's kitchen. Not the stove, not the oven, not the stand mixer collecting dust on the counter. The can opener. Tell me in the comments which of these meals your family made on the hottest nights. I read every single one. This is Vintage Lifestyle USA, and I will see you in the next one.